2. Dougal and the House Party. Dougal was sipping a cup of tea one morning and thinking about his house. I wonder if I should move, sell up the old homestead and seek pastures new. He looked around. It's getting a bit tatty. One strong wind and it would all fall down. There was a knock on the door. 2 cups fell off the dresser and Dougal's chair collapsed. "Come in," he said heavily. Brian came in. "I say, you're in a bit of a pickle, aren't you? Broken cups, broken chairs, and been having a party?" "Yes, I was entertaining a snail." "Oh, anyone I know?" "Oh, be quiet," said Dougal. "I can see you're upset," said Brian. "Tell your little mate everything." "Look at it all," said Dougal. "Not fit for a snail to live in. I must move, make a fresh start." "You want a fresh start," said Brian. "I will rally your chums and we will build you a new house. Leave it to me." And he rushed out, slamming the door. The bookcase fell down. Brian found Florence talking to Dylan, Ermintrude, and Mr. Rusty. "We are needed by someone." "Who?" said Florence. "My little hairy mate, that dog. His house is falling about his ears, and I said we would build him another one. Are we going to let him down?" "Certainly not," said Florence. "We will do our best for our friend Dougal, won't we?" "We will," they said. "We will do our best." "Our very, very best," said Florence. "Yes, indeed," they said. "We need plans," said Brian, "and wood and nails and doors and windows and furniture and carpets and cups and saucers and a teapot and a lot of lettuce." "Lettuce?" they said. "Well, you don't want me to starve, do you?" "Why, what are you going to be doing?" they said. "Supervising, giving orders, very taxing to the brain, and my first order is, ready, steady, go." So they went. Florence and the others arrived at Dougal's house. They looked through the open window and saw Dougal asleep. "Now's our chance," said Florence. "We'll build it before he wakes up and give him a surprise." "If we build it before he wakes up, I'll get the surprise," said Brian. Taking care not to step on Dougal, they took the house apart bit by bit until they had it all laid out and ready to put up again. Ermintrude dropped a chimney pot. "Shh," said Florence. "You'll wake him." They decided to put Dougal's house together again a little way from where he was sleeping. They got the walls up and stood back to look at it. "Oh, we've forgotten the drain," said Brian. "The water won't run out of a sink, and you know what he's like, always making tea." "Are you good at drains?" said Florence. "Not particularly, but I know someone who is. I'll go and get him." Dylan put the books in the bookcase, and Mr. Rusty got in everybody's way. Brian came back. "Here we are, my friend Frank. He's a mole and very good at drains." "We need drains for the sink," they said. "Easy," said Frank, and he climbed into the sink and disappeared. There was a shout from outside. There was Frank, covered in mud, sitting on the ground about 20 yards away. "It's a great drain, one of my best," and he disappeared. "Good heavens," said Florence. "Where's he gone now?" "To catch the underground, I expect," said Mr. Rusty, and he laughed so much he fell over. They tiptoed across to Dougal and picked him up. "Which end have you got?" said Brian, puffing a lot. "Doesn't matter," said Florence. They put Dougal into his bed and crept out. "Won't he get a surprise?" they said. "Aren't we clever?" they said. And they left, closing the door behind them with a bang. Dougal woke up, yawned and stretched. He got up. "I'll just have a cup of tea," he said, putting the kettle under the tap and turning it on. "Here is the weather forecast," said the tap. "What? Something's happened while I've been asleep. I wonder what." He turned on the television, and a jet of water hit him in the eye. "What?" he screeched, mopping himself down. He ran round in little circles to calm himself. He went to the front door. It wouldn't open. He rushed upstairs. There was a back door in the bedroom wall. He opened it and went out. "Ah!" he screamed, clinging onto the television aerial. "Help! Help!" Just then, Florence and the others came back. "What are you doing, Dougal?" said Florence. "Come down at once." Dougal came down with a thud. "We've come to tea," said Florence. "May we go in?" Dougal groaned. Florence tried the door. It wouldn't open. "We'll have to go round to the back door." "The back door's up there," screeched Dougal. Florence looked. "Oh dear," she said. "Oh dear," said the others. "Sorry," said Florence, and she called to Zebedee and explained the situation. "I think we can do something about that," said Zebedee, and he said a few magic words. Dougal's house gave a creak and a thud, hopped a few feet in the air, and came to rest in its old position. They went in. The house was beautiful. "Pleased, Dougal," said Florence. Dougal sat down carefully. The chair creaked. "Time will tell," he said. Dougal and the Perfumed Garden. Dougal was fast asleep when there was a tap on his door. "What?" he said. What? He grumbled out of bed, unlocked the door, and opened it. It was Brian. Dougal looked at him hard. "It's 3 o'clock in the morning," he said, "and I'm not very well. Sorry to hear that. May I come in?" And he came in. "I expect you're wondering what I want. There's a prowler in the garden." "A prowler? What's he doing?" "Prowling," said Brian. "What do you want me to do about it?" "Well, I thought you'd go out there and catch him and ask him what he's doing and tell him anything he says will be used in evidence and all that sort of thing." Brian helped himself to tea. "Well, are you going?" "Is he armed?" "Yes, 2, said Brian, "like most people." Dougal controlled himself with difficulty. "I mean, does he have a gun or anything, you great clump?" "Well, he had something pretty wicked-looking in his hands. It frightened me." "Anything frightens you," said Dougal. "Come on." Outside, it was very dark. "Dark, isn't it?" said Brian loudly. Dougal left behind a tree. "Sorry," said Brian. "Did I make you jump?" Dougal came out. They went on. "Where did you see this prowler?" "Over there." They looked over there, and there was a prowler. Definitely prowling. They hid behind a bush and watched. The prowler was dressed in black from head to foot and behaving in a very strange way. He was going up to each flower in the garden and squirting it with a big brass garden spray. Every now and then he refilled his spray from some bottles he had in a bag. "What a funny carry-on," said Brian. "You can say that again," said Dougal. "What a funny carry-on." "Oh, be quiet." "Shall we pounce?" said Brian. "I'm a very good pouncer." "By the time you'd pounce to be 3 miles away," said Dougal. "Well, you pounce then." "And get squirted," said Dougal. The dark figure moved away. They followed. It went to some rose bushes and started squirting again. "Do you think we should get Florence?" said Brian. Dougal looked at him pityingly. "Rouse a young lady in the middle of the night? What a cowardly suggestion. Are you a man or a mouse?" Brian thought. "I'm a snail." Busy talking, neither Dougal nor Brian noticed the dark figure with his spray had circled round and was coming straight towards them. "Freeze!" hissed Dougal. The figure came very close and peered at them. "Funny-looking flowers," he muttered, squirting Dougal and Brian with his spray and moving on. Dougal sniffed. There was a very strong smell of roses everywhere. "Have you been using scent?" "Certainly not," said Brian. So, smelling like two rose bushes, they followed the man with the spray. "Where's he going?" panted Dougal. "Perhaps he's run out of squirt and is going to get some more," said Brian. Sure enough, the man stopped at a house and went in. "Hey, old fellow sleuth," said Brian, "that's Mr. McHenry's house." "Odder and odder," said Dougal. "What's he doing in Mr. McHenry's house?" They went nearer and looked in the window. Inside it was all dark and sinister. "I hope Mr. McHenry's all right," said Brian. "I like him." Suddenly all the lights went on in Mr. McHenry's house, and they saw Mr. McHenry. He's safe," whispered Brian. They watched. Mr. McHenry moved about the room busily. He picked up several coloured bottles and put them in a row. Then he took a big coloured jug and started to fill them. On the table was the large spray. "The phantom squirter," whispered Dougal. "Old Mr. McHenry," whispered Brian. "Whoever would have thought it," said Dougal. "I would," said Brian. "I never liked him." Mr. McHenry finished filling the bottles and packed them into a large bag. He picked up the spray and went to the door. "He's going to start again," squeaked Brian. "We'll follow and observe," said Dougal. They went on. Mr. McHenry stopped at a little gate in a high wall, opened it and went in. "We've got him," said Dougal. "Come on." And he shot through the gate and slammed it shut behind them. "We've trapped him." "You've trapped us too," said Brian. "We're all alone behind this high wall with the mad squirter." Dougal blenched. "Back!" he screeched. But it was too late. Mr. McHenry had heard them and was approaching. "Keep back, fiend," said Dougal. "Fiend?" said Mr. McHenry. "What do you mean, fiend?" "You've been killing all the flowers," squeaked Brian. Mr. McHenry explained that in the garden, which was a bit of magic, the flowers lasted forever, but the scent of the flowers tended to wear off, so he had to go round every now and then putting the scent back with his special spray. "Why do you do it in the middle of the night?" they asked. "Well, I don't want anyone to know," said Mr. McHenry. Brian and Dougal promised not to tell. "Well, I think you'd better come back to my place," said Mr. McHenry. "I'll make you all one of my special breakfasts, toast and honey, waffles and treacle, scones and jam, carrot salad and a cup of tea." They went. "I've always liked him," whispered Brian. The tea party. Dougal was at home early one morning, sipping a cup of tea and thinking about life. "Perhaps it's not too bad." He put down his empty cup. "Then again, perhaps it is." There was a knock at the door. Dougal got up. Another knock, louder. All right, I'm coming." Dougal opened the door. It was Brian, wearing a very large blue cap and carrying a very large canvas bag. "Can I come in?" "I can't think of any reason why you should," said Dougal. "Postmen are always asked in, and I'm a postman. I demand to be asked in and provided with comforts." He pushed past Dougal, went in, sat down, and started to whistle a little tune. Dougal put the kettle on. "Boiling already?" said Brian. "Of course not," said Dougal. "Oh, I thought I heard it whistling." "That was you." Dougal made some tea, gave a cup to Brian, and sat down. "Lovely day," said Brian. He finished his tea. "Well, I must be off." "Haven't you forgotten something?" said Dougal. Brian paused. Dougal stepped on the canvas bag as Brian went by, and Brian somersaulted and landed on his shell upside down. "You tripped me up," he squeaked accusingly. "An accident," said Dougal. "Lucky, though, or you might have gone without giving me my letter." "So I might," said Brian. He gave a great heave, righted himself, and scuttled into the bag. Dougal pulled at the strap on the bag and lifted it up. Brian disappeared with a thump inside. "I shall count to 3, said Dougal, "and then if my letter doesn't appear, I shall hang this bag on a hook and go on holiday." "We postmen aren't easily frightened," shouted Brian from inside the bag. "1, said Dougal. 2. A letter appeared. Dougal dropped the bag. Brian crawled out. "It's an invitation," he said. "We've all got one," and he went out very quickly. Dougal rushed after him. "Rotter!" he shouted. "Spoil sport!" Dougal sat down to read his letter. It was an invitation from Florence. She asked everyone to come to tea that day and said he was to be sure to come, as she's got everything arranged and lots of lovely things in. He brushed his hair and then had a sudden thought. "I must take her something, a present, some flowers perhaps." Outside the sun was shining and it was very hot. There didn't seem to be many flowers about. "I shall go to Mr. McHenry. He'll have some in his greenhouse." But Mr. McHenry hadn't. "It's this dry weather we've been having. We need rain." He pointed to the weathercock on top of the church. "See that? Wind's in the south. Needs to be in the west for rain." And he went into his greenhouse and started mulching a few things. Dougal went slowly towards the church. He had to have flowers for Florence. There seemed to be only one thing to be done, so he did it. Halfway up the church steeple, he stopped for breath. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," he thought. He passed 2 pigeons sitting on a ledge. "Afternoon." The pigeons remained silent. "Suit yourselves," grunted Dougal, clambering on. "Was that a dog?" said one of the pigeons. "Don't be silly, Phyllis," murmured the other. Dougal reached the top and looked at the weathercock. I have a request. We need a little rain, and you're pointing the wrong way. Might I trouble you to turn to the west?" "Can't be done," said the weathercock. "Not without a chitty in triplicate." Dougal sighed, eased himself up a little, and slipped. "Whoops!" he shouted, grabbing the weathercock and spinning round. A wind started to blow. The weathercock went round faster and faster. "You haven't got a chitty!" "Oh, shut up." The weathercock bent a little. The wind blew more and more. It started to thunder. Another bend and a squeak, and the weathercock jammed and stopped. Dougal was thrown off and found himself slithering down the steeple. He passed the pigeons very fast. "I've seen that dog again. I'm getting very worried about you, Phyllis." Dougal reached the bottom just as it started to pour with rain. The weathercock was pointing firmly to the west, and Dougal was soaked to the skin. With water dripping off him, Dougal hurried to Mr. McHenry's. "Lovely weather," he shouted through the crashing thunder. A wave of water carried them right into the greenhouse. I thought you needed rain," said Dougal. "Rain I needed," said Mr. McHenry. "Floods I can do without." He grabbed a passing pot of geraniums. "Look at that! Pitifully bedraggled." "Can I have it?" said Dougal. "Well, I don't want it," said Mr. McHenry. Dougal took the pot and looked down. The water seemed very deep and muddy. "You don't have a boat handy, do you?" Mr. McHenry finally snapped. "No, I do not. This is a nursery, not Portsmouth Harbour." Dougal decided it was time to leave and started to swim towards Florence's house. Everyone was there looking out of the window. Mr. Rusty, Brian, Ermintrude, Dillon, and Zebedee. Florence opened the window, and Dougal heaved himself up and fell inside onto the carpet. He turned to Florence. "I've brought you a flower." "Oh, Dougal, how lovely," said Florence. "You shouldn't have bothered." "Oh, it was no bother," said Dougal. "Any cake left?" And there was. The Roundabout. The next day they discovered a terrible thing. The great storm had damaged the magic roundabout, and Mr. Rusty was very upset. He'd gone to start it up as usual and found it all bent and twisted. "Isn't it awful?" said Florence. Dougal gulped, feeling very responsible when he remembered the weathercock. "Awful," he squeaked. "Awful." Everyone agreed that something must be done about it, and they all sat down to think what to do. "I know," said Brian. "I know. It's simple." "Tell us, Brian," they said. "The roundabout is broken. True?" "True," they all said. "Then we must mend it. Simple." He looked round triumphantly. "How about a round of applause?" "How about a thump on the buns?" said Dougal. "Oh, sorry, I thought perhaps the fundamentals of the problem had been overlooked." "Our fundamental problem is you," said Dougal. "Now be quiet and think." They all thought again. "I've got it," said Brian. "This time I've really got it. We need to mend the roundabout. True?" "True," they said. "So why don't we ring up the roundabout menders? Simple." They all thought. "That's a great idea, man," said Dylan, and he dropped off to sleep with relief. Dougal got up and went over to Brian. "There are just one or two minor points I should like to raise." "Raise them," said Brian confidently. "1. We don't know any roundabout menders to ring up. 2. I doubt if anyone knows any roundabout menders to ring up. 3. I doubt if there are any roundabout menders to ring up. 4. We haven't got a telephone book. And 5. We haven't got a telephone. Now let's all think sensibly about what to do. You too," he said to Brian. But Brian had gone. So they all thought again. There was a rumble in the distance. "Not another thunderstorm, I hope," said Mr. Rusty nervously. "I think it's a train, dear heart," said Ermentrude. But it wasn't. It was a lorry. It was a very old lorry, and it made a lot of noise. It came to a halt by the roundabout. Painted on the side was "Nettleship and Butt, Roundabout Mending and Denture Repairs. Hurdy-gurdy specialists, estimates free." Brian got out of the lorry. "Friends of mine," he said, "may I introduce Mr. Nettleship and Mr. Butt?" Two very old men got out of the lorry. "Roundabout menders," said Brian, looking at Dougal. Dougal sighed. "You can't win, can you?" he said to Florence. Mr. Nettleship and Mr. Butt walked round looking at the damage. 1913 model, said Mr. Nettleship. "More like 1915, I'd say," said Mr. Butt. "Then it's got self-winding elastic sprockets and apple wood connections to the rollers." Dougal and Brian giggled like anything. "I wonder if it's got fur-lined conkers," said Brian. "A grunge grabbers on the waffles," said Dougal, and they both fell about laughing like anything. Mr. Nettleship and Mr. Butt walked over to the lorry and pulled out 2 big bags of tools. "I think the first problem is to stabilize the equilibrium joints," said Mr. Nettleship. "Indubitably," said Mr. Butt. "Now, to get at the equilibrium joints, we need the roundabout on its side." So they attached a rope to the top and gave a hearty pull. The roundabout fell over. "Get it off me!" screeched Dougal. Mr. Nettleship and Mr. Butt came round to look. If you could stay there for a little while," they said to Dougal, "it will greatly assist us. We have the machine at just the right angle. You are, if anything, better than a wedge." "I'm so glad," said Dougal. The roundabout menders got to work. All sorts of tools came out of the tool bags, and there was lots of banging and crashing and wrenching. The roundabout gradually took shape again. A final twist, and the last bend was straightened. "There then," said Mr. Butt. "Perfect," said Mr. Nettleship. All that was needed was to put the roundabout drive the right way up and test for stability and accuracy. Everyone got hold of the rope and pulled. The roundabout straightened up with a jerk, and Dougal flipped straight up into the air and landed quivering on the top. "Get me down!" he shrieked. "It's all right now," they said, "except for one small thing. That mascot on the top is too heavy, in our opinion." "I am not a mascot," screamed Dougal. "I am here by accident, and I feel very sick. Get a ladder." They got a ladder, and Dougal was helped down. "Now, I don't wish to complain," he said, "but I have been used as a wedge. Would it be too much to ask if anyone is thinking of making a cup of tea?" Everyone went into Mr. Rusty's place for tea. Mr. Nettleship and Mr. Butt had a cup each, and they said they had to go. They all waved goodbye as the lorry rattled away. "Anyone feel like a ride on the roundabout?" said Mr. Rusty. "I think I'll just have another cup of tea and watch," said Dougal. Which he did.